as moderators. First of all, let me thank our association for giving me the opportunity to serve as organizing secretary for this national online GCP workshop. As all of you know, that GCP is an international, ethical, and scientific quality standard for the design, conduct, recording, and reporting of the clinical trials. All investigators and staff who are involved in the conduct of any clinical trials are required to complete the training in GCP and refresh this training regularly to update the knowledge. This is even more pertinent given the many changes and amendments in the clinical trial as well as new drug approval rules and regulation in India in recent past. So we are having total 8 topics in this online workshop starting from overview of Indian GCP to 7 features of the INDICITY 2019. World is celebrating International Women Day on 8th March on every year and support the woman empowerment. So in line with that, NPT also would like to give first topic to woman who is the stalwarts in clinical research to act as the resource person. I hope that this would be a great experience for all of our dear participants during this 1 month. Now I request our organizing chairperson of the workshop, Dr. Samir Malhotra sir, to address the gathering. Over to Dr. Samir Malhotra sir.
I have already addressed. Now I wish you to start the proceedings. I don't want to
Okay, sir.
stand in between the speakers and the audience. Okay.
Okay, sir. Okay, sir. So we will go ahead with the message by Executive Director of the AIMS, Nagpur, sir.
Good afternoon to all of you. The President of National Association of Pharmacology and Therapeutics, Dr. R.K. Dixit, National Coordinator, Dr. Kamal, Organizing Chairperson of the workshop, Dr. Samir Malhotra, and Organizing Secretary, Dr. Ganesh Dakle, welcome you all for this National Online GCP Workshop of national importance. It gives me a great pleasure to act as a patron for this workshop. Well, recently ICMR and DCGI have developed new guidelines and rules for the conduct of clinical trials and biomedical research after careful and long deliberations with experts and stakeholders, and documents are being prepared. It is essential that all stakeholders are aware of these guidelines, which would help to improve the quality of biomedical research. And this course will be attended by faculty from not only from the academia but also from the industry who are involved in clinical trials and new drug development. I am very happy that Department of Pharmacology, HOD Dr. Ganesh Dakle, along with this National Association of Pharmacology and Therapeutics, is organizing this important workshop of national importance. And there are two very important things when we develop new drugs. One in and according to GCP, one is protection of the rights of the individuals and subjects who are participating in the trial. That is very important so that we conduct clinical trials which are ethically correct. And in addition, the data which is generated should be of high quality, should be valid, reliable and authentic. These are two important aspects of GCP guidelines, and they should be conducted as per the laid down standard rules and regulations which are there prepared by ICMR and DCGI. I welcome and all of you and wish all the best for this national workshop. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for your valuable address. Now I request our National Coordinator, Dr. CM Kamal, sir, to release the video of the workshop. Over to Dr. Kamal, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Dakle, sir. We are putting the video now.
Thank you, Dr. Kamal sir, for preparing the nice video. Today we are having two sessions. First is on overview of Indian GCP and second is on responsibilities of investigators, sponsor and monitors. The first session will be moderated by Dr. Nusrat Shafiq Madam. Madam is presently working as professor in the Department of Clinical Pharmacology, PGI, MER, Chandigarh. Madam is also member secretary of Institute Ethics Committee for Drug Trials, as well as co-chair of Institute Ethics Committee, AIMS, Mohali. Madam is also ex-president of Society of Antimicrobial Practices of India. Madam also acted as the expert consultation for National Action Plan of AMR2 as well as review committees for novel antimicrobials WHO. She was also principal investigator for India Hub for Center for Antimicrobial Optimization Network Lead and for ICMR Phase 1 network. Madam is also having publication in leading national as well as international journals. I welcome you, Madam, for this workshop as a moderator. Second session will be moderated by Dr. Vipul Chaudhary, sir, who is professor and head at GCS Medical College, Ahmedabad. Sir has worked as principal investigator in Phase 1 and BA project at Lambda Therapeutic, one of the CRO, for 3 years. Sir is also member in 2 ethics committees, and Sir has given guest lecture on GCP as well as pharmacokinetics at the national level. Sir is having more than 15 research paper in various journals. I also welcome to Dr. Chaudhary, sir. Now I request Dr. Shafiq Madam to introduce today's first speaker, Dr. Usharani Pingri Madam. First session will be for 20 minutes, followed by question and answer session for 10 minutes. And participants can put their questions in the chat box and moderator will take it once the session is over. Over to Dr. Shafiq Madam.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ganesh, for that kind introduction. At the outset, I would like to thank the organizers for organizing this workshop and giving me an opportunity to introduce the first opening woman for this session. And it is no other than Dr. Usharani Pingali, who actually doesn't need much of an introduction. But nevertheless, I would like to inform all the gathered audience here that ma'am is a senior professor and head of the department at Clinical Pharmacology and Therapeutics Department of Nizam's Institute. Ma'am is a certified and ABH assessor for Ethics Committee, so we are actually hearing from the horse's mouth. And she's member of DBT Task Force on Translational Research and Development of Products and Processes from Medicinal and Aromatic Plants. Ma'am was an ex-member of Harvard MRCT Post-Trial Access and Return of Individual Results Working Group. And needless to say, she has received various scientific awards and has published papers in leading journals. Without much ado, I would request Dr. Usha to hold the stage from here on. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Nusrat, for the introduction. It was really nice seeing you and hearing from you. Thank Dr. Dikshit, Dr. Dakle sir, and of course, Dr. Kamal and my friend Samir Malhotra for giving me this opportunity. And the topic, I think I'm audible and my slides are visible. Yeah.
Yes, madam.
Yeah. So, yeah, thank you. And the topic given to me was overview of Indian GCP and ICH GCP. And I think that's a pretty interesting and, important topic. I'll just go through a little on the introduction and on the guidelines. So GCP, I always said, it's good clinical practice, but it is better to refer to as good clinical research practice, because we being pharmacologists, we tend to do more of research. And anything you do, whether it is a regulatory study or an academic research, it is mandatory to follow GCP, because as we see in the definition, it is an ethical and scientific quality standard for the design, conduct, performance, monitoring, auditing, recording, analysis, and reporting of clinical trials. So it covers the entire gamut of clinical trials right from designing to reporting. So at every aspect, every step, we need to follow a good clinical practices, and that enables, will be giving you credible and accurate data on one side, and protecting the right, safety, and well-being of the participants on the other side. But why did all this start? If you go back to the history, when we just took off as medical students, we did have to take the Hippocrates oath. So it actually starts right from there. And then we have the various guidelines and codes which have come up: the Nuremberg Code, the Declaration of Helsinki, the Belmont Report, the Indian GCP, and then the updated version of the Indian GCP, which happened in September 2024. And the ICH GCP, which is the international guideline. And all this was required, as we know about because a lot of infamous research or, unethical research had taken place in the past. So because of that, we have these evolved guidelines to protect the right, safety, and well-being, of which the most important is the Tuskegee syphilis study, where there was penicillin discovered, but it was not utilized, and the patients were not informed it was existing. And in fact, President Clinton had to give a public apology for this, because it was an NIH-funded study. We have the Nazis, before that, we had the Nazis experiments on, war prisoners, exposing them to cold, exposing them to heat, and seeing the time to death, which is definitely not acceptable at all these days. And the human radiation experiments. All these things have led us to form guidelines. So the Declaration of Helsinki, which actually started in 1964, it was adopted by the World Medical Association with the latest revision in 2013, which it's a preamble of 37 principles. And all these guidelines, whatever we may be discussing right now, will be discussing on the ethical standards for, conducting research in human subjects. So that is the basis of the guidelines, because when you see the good clinical practice, it is nothing but one side you have the ethics, which talks about safety of the subject, and the other side you have quality data, because if the data is having good quality, it becomes credible, and that becomes acceptable to the people, not only at a national level, but at an international level also, and that is what we are actually aiming for now. So the goals of GCP is to protect the right, safety, well-being of subjects, which we have discussed, to assure quality data, that is, it should be reliable in the sense that if someone is going to reproduce the same experiment, they should be able to get similar data, so that is what it means. And then to provide standard guidelines for conducting trials. And it is, and we need to comply, to reach the goals, we need to comply with GCP so that, we have safety protected and quality data. So whose responsibility is it? So it is, everybody's, all the stakeholders are responsible to conduct trials as per GCP, whether it is the CRO or the sponsor who's actually sponsoring the study, the institute, which is having the investigator, the ethics committees who are approving the studies, investigators conducting the study, as well as regulators who are overseeing the whole thing, because, everything, all the stakeholders go hand in hand with each other. So everyone is responsible. It is not one person's responsibility. And the key principles are ethics and protection of human subjects. And then the scientific validity and protocol adherence. Actually, according ethics and protection, we have a session on ethics committee, so I will not be indulging too much into the details. And scientific validity and protocol adherence, this is something very important. If you're not conducting the study as per the protocol, which will come in the investigator's responsibility, which the next speaker will be discussing, then there'll be no scientific validity to the study, because there'll be too many deviations and violations if the protocol is not followed. And most of these protocols are the ones which are, approved by regulators for a regulatory trial. And all of them are, approved by the ethics committees of the concerned institute. So it is mandatory to follow the protocol. Informed consent, that's a very big detailed chapter, which will be discussed subsequently with another speaker. Confidentiality and data integrity. Now, this is something which is extremely important because this data belongs to a subject and it needs to be kept confidential, so confidentiality is something, and then data integrity, because that is when you get acceptable data, which if the study is done ethically following the guidelines. And of course, and then you always need to have someone who's going to oversee, like, in a classroom, you have the teacher overseeing the students, the exam hall, you have an invigilator who oversees the people writing the exam. In the same way, when people are conducting studies, there should be some oversight, and that is done by the ethics committees who oversee the studies which are being conducted. And in fact, that is an addition to the latest guidelines which talk about, monitoring and auditing of the ethics committees by of the studies by the ethics committees which give approval. So that is an independent oversight. And of course, last but not the least, compliance with the regulatory requirement. Everyone has to comply to the regulatory requirement. If you're doing studies within India, then you follow the Indian GCP guidelines, the ICMR guidelines, the NDCT rules. But if you're doing a study in India for US submission or the European Union submission, you need to follow the Indian guidelines along with the regulatory guidelines of this particular country. So everything needs to be followed. So when you talk of ICHGCP, E6 is that portion dealing with good clinical practice or the GCP. So that is why you have ICH G6, E6, R2, R3. That is the latest version which have come up subsequent to the revisions. So E6 deals with good clinical practice. So International Council for Harmonization, ICH, which is actually it is a guideline for conducting biomedical research. It was established in 1982 with WHO, UNESCO, and SIOMS. And the main aim of all this was advancing public health by publishing guidelines on ethics, product development, and safety. And why was all this required? Suppose you're having some product in some studies being conducted in one country, the data was not accepted in the other countries. So they all came together, the European Union, the US FDA, Japan initially, and then the other countries also joined subsequently, and they came up with a standard set of ICH GCP guidelines, which talk about how the studies should be conducted so that the data is acceptable everywhere, it is credible, and then, of course, the right safeties of the subjects are also being, not compromised, rather. So you have quality guidelines, safety guidelines, efficacy, and then multidisciplinary guidelines. So the core principles of ICH GCP is ethics, and that is first always. And then you have the protocols and science. And then actually the ethics and the science go hand in hand. If you see, ethics starts with E and ends with an S. And science starts with S and ends with an E. So it is actually they're running hand in hand. You have to follow the scientific principle as well as the ethical standards as per, and then only you can get credible data and safe subject safety is also maintained. So ethics, science, and protocols, then responsibilities as we have discussed, and then subsequent speakers will be discussing the responsibilities of the investigators, the sponsors in detail. Informed consent, that has always been pretty close to my heart. It's one of the most difficult aspects and the most important aspects because informed consent, the consent was not taken in those earlier days where the experiments on syphilis or the German prisoners was conducted. So the basis of all this is informed consent and of course quality and integrity of data. So there has been an evolution from R2 to R3, that is the revision 2 to revision 3, that's in simple terms. And it was the latest ICH E6, which talks about GCP. The R3 version was released in Jan 2025. And the key updates are, because now we are talking more in terms of AI and technology, and also that was mostly incorporated into the R3 guidelines. And then strengthening the role of risk-based monitoring. We have discussed some aspects of saying that this company needs to monitor, but the sponsors will be monitoring. And then they said that the risk-based monitoring should be done. Incorporating patient-centric approach. So earlier it was mostly it was never a patient-centric approach, but now it has become more patient-centric, enhancing data integrity, and expanding the use of digital technologies in clinical trials. So these are the key changes from RT to AR3, which I've just depicted here. Patient centricity, earlier it was less emphasis because everything else was equally important, but now for more and more the focus is shifting to patients, including the trial designs and all that, are also shifting more towards making it more patient-focused guidelines, taking care of patients more. The technology earlier was limited, but now we have a strong focus on the digital technology and the AI tools. And even the Indian ICMR has recently come up with guidelines on the use of AI. And I think it's a good idea if we can go through those guidelines, because the next, that will be the one which is going to take up. Risk management recommendations were there, but now it is a comprehensive risk-based monitoring approach, which is now being advised. Data integrity was important, but it was less structured. And now there is more focus on real-time data monitoring. That is, as and when it happens, that is real-time data monitoring. It was there earlier, like you could never say, yesterday the patient came at 3 o'clock and gave a consent at 6 o'clock. It has to be today, or the data should be documented yesterday at 3 and yesterday at 6. So you cannot do anything retrospectively. And decentralized clinical trials were not explicitly included earlier, but now they are being encouraged for wider patient participation. So coming to the Indian scenario, what is happening in India? In 1980, we have the first ICMR guidelines issued. The then Justice Dr. Venkatachalaya committee was the first one to give the guidelines. And then, of course, in 2001, we had the Indian GCP guidelines by ICMR and CDISCO. And they're mostly based on, the ICA GCP guidelines. And then they actually it's their aim to provide framework for ethical and scientific integrity for clinical trials. And ICMR has come up with a series of guidelines on conducting biomedical health research in Indian population, followed by the COVID during pandemics, what to do, and then now the latest one on the AI. And the latest GCP version was released in September 2024. And since we are going to talk about GCP today, that was the topic. So let us concentrate on the Indian GCP Guidelines 2024, which has the following chapters, the definitions, prerequisites, and I think all of you should have a copy of this Indian GCP guidelines and read it also, because that is what is going to be required for all of us. The investigational products, preclinical data, then the protocol. So what are the components of the protocol? So many a times, even as students, when you write protocols, I think if you just go through these guidelines, you will know at least the main aspects of what should be there in the protocol you're writing. Then the appendices. And one thing which has been added is the academic clinical study and the academic clinical research, which ICMR has made, even in their guidelines, they've come up in a big way on a separate aspect of of academic clinical research, where you have the biomedical research committees also, which are going to, oversee these academic research projects. Then ethical and safety considerations in 2.4, where you talk about the ethics committees, about the consent, the reimbursement for participation. See, this is a little different from compensation. Compensation is related to an injury or death, but reimbursement and patient for the travel and expenses, and also for any, areas which happen outside your place of work or whatever. So they have to be reimbursed for everything when they're in the study, and then additionally compensated for any study-related injury or death. And responsibilities of the sponsor, I'll not go into all this because we have a session on that. So the sponsor has a lot of responsibility, right from starting the contract or the clinical trial agreement till the study closure and transfer of the study stuff back to the sponsor's site. So everything has to be there, and everything has to be documented, because if it's not documented, GCP says it did not happen. So every aspect needs to be documented. That is one of the investigator's responsibility, documentation. Of course, monitoring the, since it becoming under the sponsor's aspect, I'll not be touching on that. So investigators, there was what I would just like to add a couple of things here, which investigator, as per our Indian regulatory definitions, it is a person who is experienced and who is qualified enough. So there were a few instances when in a regulatory study, the PI is of course the principal investigator is a faculty member who is qualified and experienced, and the co-PI is one of the students. So then this question had come when we had gone for an audit to one of the sites for ethics committee auditing. See, the student cannot be a co-PI because they are not qualified and experienced as per the definition. They can be a co-investigator, but not a co-PI. A co-PI is one who's going to take over all the responsibilities of the investigator when the investigator is traveling or on leave or anything. So that was one thing, because that was a major audit objection which was there. And then communication with the ethics committee is again only done by the investigator. The sponsor cannot communicate with the ethics committee. So, and then about the archiving, of course, I think anyway that will be being discussed. So, yeah, record keeping and handling of data and corrections. These were some of the things which were, major audit problems when we had gone for monitoring. Whenever you make a correction, you just have to put a line, put your initial date and write the correct value. So at least, what was written should be able, like, the person auditing should be able to read what was written earlier. And then a note to file should be put saying it is a transcription error or whatever is the reason of making the correction. And since now you're using these computerized programs, what is the support system? Is it validated and all that? Should be, you should have documentation for everything. Quality assurance and quality control is very good to have somebody checking what you are doing, because corporate hospitals do have it, but it's a good idea to have someone, from the organization, setting up a committee to look into all this. And then, of course, the biostatistician, whose role is going to be very important when the part of DSMB and then when you break a blinding. So, yeah. Then special concerns when you're taking, research in vaccines, and especially in children. I'm not accounting the adult vaccines, especially because vaccines are mostly given to infants and children, and you want to do something new. Then again, there is a whole set of guidelines which need to be followed. So, there are a lot of separate guidelines for doing studies with medical devices, and you have even the material vigilance, which is looking into the adverse reactions of, the devices and all that. And yeah. So the key principles are ethical conduct, which must be conducted in accordance with the Declaration of Helsinki and, ethical guidelines. Scientific validity. A study should not be done just because you want to fulfill a criteria for getting a publication or, getting a thesis done. There should be some take-home message from the study which is done, because there'll be a lot of wastage of resources, including the time, the patients. So there should be some value addition should be there when a study is being done. And nowadays the ethics committees are insisting on something like that. Consent, of course, there's a separate class on it. I think somebody is going to speak on consent. So every study, if you're not taking a consent, you should give a reason why you're asking for a waiver, which should be approved by your ethics committee. And that letter also should be kept in place. Confidentiality of the documents and the person and the, every study related, instruments or whatever, they should be kept in separate lock and key. Ethics review by the ethics committee, which will be discussed. Qualification of the investigators, we have already discussed, and data integrity. In all aspects, from the recording, reporting, archiving, everything, you need to have integrity. And these are the main guidelines of our country, the ICMR guidelines. This is the ICMR ethical guidelines for application of artificial intelligence in biomedical research and healthcare, where they did discuss some aspects. It's very, it's interesting to read that, because even on the flip side, like how is the data integrity? How is the confidentiality being maintained? How is the data being stored? Who has access to the servers where the data is being stored? And so there are a lot of things, a lot of gray areas, and I think it's good to know these guidelines. Of course, the NDCT rules, which all of us must follow, and then the GCP guidelines, which have come up in September 2024. So I just want to end up with a couple of differences between the ICA GCP and Indian GCP. The scope of the Indian GCP is for Indian country, while ICA GCP is an international guideline. The Indian GCP, when you talk about ethics committee, they say it is mandatory, and then they give you a detailed regulation on the monitoring. While if you see ICA GCP, they say they'll lay emphasis on independent oversight, but they have not made it mandatory like our guideline. Informed consent process is stringent in the Indian GCP with local languages, translations, back translations, approvals, and all that. While ICA GCP is talking more of digital and remote consent. Data integrity is focused on source data verification in Indian GCP, while ICA GCP is most on the electronic data management. While risk-based monitoring, it's not explicitly mentioned in our guidelines. There is a strong emphasis in the ICA GCP. Compensation for trial-related injuries is mandatory as per the Indian regulatory framework, but in ICA GCP, it is addressed, and it varies from the region to region because it's a global one. So what are the regulatory implications for clinical trials in India? The impact of the updated GCP on the trial designs have been, it is actually, now there are a lot of stringent ethical safety requirements. When you talk about the newer trial designs, you need to very clearly, emphasize why you're changing the trial design, or why are you using adaptive, and what is going to happen, on the patient safety when such new designs are being used. Increased reliance on the electronic data capture systems, artificial intelligence, which we have already discussed the guidelines. And having said all that, there are challenges in implementing these guidelines because we need to get trained, and that's exactly what we are trying to do now. Update ourselves on the recent guidelines, and then trying to balance the ethical requirements of the trial versus the feasibility of the trial, and then the participants. And what happens if you don't comply? This is one thing which is extremely important, and we all should know that if we don't comply, we are legally liable, because it may be raised from simple mistakes to fraud, and simple mistakes can be extremely costly, especially in relation to a consent, not taking the consent, taking the consent in different language, and the big gamut of issues which can crop up with that. And handling of specimens and processing of specimens and the drugs or anything like that. And the consequences can range from loss of data, which we talked about, data integrity and scientific validity we've been emphasizing a lot. But if we don't follow GCP, then there may be loss of data. The site may be closed, the data may be invalid, and so there's a lot of wastage of resources. And of course, the professional reputation of the PI and the reputation of the institute is going to be at stake because they may be blacklisted. So applying GCP to your study, you need to understand the key factors which are required for protecting the right safety of the subject and integrity of the data. And of course, we should allow monitoring. And ultimately, it is the PI's responsibility. Delegation of responsibility is acceptable, but not abdication of responsibility. At the end of the day, the PI is the one who's actually responsible for conduct of a GCP compliant trial. And the take-home messages are, ethical considerations are central to both Indian and ICH GCP. So whichever good clinical practice procedures you're following, ethical consideration is the crux of the whole thing. Strengthen safeguards for participation, data integrity and monitoring. And ICH GCP evolving towards patient centricity and technology-driven approaches, as we have been seeing. The regulatory framework in India is definitely becoming more and more stringent, and all this is being done to, for patients' safety and quality data. And experiment is ethical or not, it does not actually become ethical post hoc, which means that the ends do not justify the means. So thank you and happy learning. So if there are any questions, maybe a couple of quick questions.
Thank you, Dr. Usha. Thank you for walking us through all the different aspects of GCP. Let me see if there are any questions in the Q&A session. I'm afraid I can just see one question from Mr. Ravindra, wherein he just writes scientific validity query. Dr. Ravindra, I would appreciate if you could possibly put it down in a form of a question. What exactly do you want to ask? And in the meantime, may I exercise the privilege of a moderator to ask you a question, ma'am? Yeah, ma'am, basically, we have been talking about GCP from 2000 onwards quite vehemently and forcefully and widely. And it is now being implemented also all across. There have been umpteen trainings. All seems very good. But do we have any data to suggest that it has actually impacted quality of research in a big way? Would you be aware of any such information or?
Yeah, quality of research in a way means, yeah, when, there was a comparative study showing not exactly the quality of research, but on the ethics committees, because they are the ones who are actually reviewing the protocols and the guidelines. And even by NABH, when we have seen the data, the initial studies and initial centers which were monitored, there was actually a lot of gaps between, what is to be done and what was not done. But when we go there for the centers and all, so there is a drastic improvement and people are aware of, the quality of research has definitely improved. And then with the CTRI, which has come up, so every trial is being registered on that. So there also we can have actually access to most of the things. And in fact, they're also asking for ethics committee approvals. So once you have some monitoring in place, obviously the quality does improve. But yeah, still there are gaps. Not that everything is as rosy as we are thinking and we are talking, but I'm sure it'll all be filled up over time with, since the awareness is coming up, and I'm sure it'll be, people will definitely comply with the regulatory guidelines.
Indeed, Dr. Usha, I would agree with you totally on that. Now we also have a lot of questions there in the Q&A session. Let me start by asking one of these, which have come from one of the students, I suppose, wherein Dr. Sharmishta has asked that she needs a little clarity about a student not qualifying to be a co-PI in project. If you want, should I go through the questions in one go?
Yeah.
Yeah, and there is another one wherein Dr. Vinay Kumar has asked, is Indian GCP, has it come earlier than ICH GCP? And then Dr. Sudha asked, when you mention decentralized, is it the whole trial or is it only decentralized elements in R3 ICH GCP? I think there are quite a lot of others, but I think I'll just take one more simply because of consideration of time. I think I'll take this one. When doing thesis, which is a phase 4 clinical trial, does insurance need to be taken for patients? Does compensation need to be mandatorily provided for patients for travel and for study drugs? So, ma'am, there are some more, but I think they can be communicated to you later for being answered through some other means, because I think we've got to wind up this session as being indicated. Yes, ma'am. So all those
So
questions
regarding
for you.
the student question, I think let's take that first, because many of the people are students here. This did come up in ICMR, when we were planning some of these meetings, that can a student be a PI? So they said that, by the definition, it is experience as well as qualification to be a PI of the study. So for regulatory, yes, definitely they can be a co-PI, they can be a co-investigator, but not a PI or a co-PI. But if it's a part of a student thesis, which they're doing under the guidance of a guide, then obviously they will be the investigators of that particular thesis. And there also, if we go through the ICMR guidelines, they're very clearly said that any mishap which happens in a student thesis, the guide and the institute are responsible. That's very clearly stated in academic clinical research guidelines there. So I think the onus is obviously on the institute and the guide for a case of a student. And the other one was, what was the other question?
Which came first, ICH or Indian
Obviously, the
GCP? That is
GCP
what I did.
guidelines had
Yeah.
come up, and then the Indian GCP guidelines. Though we had the Venkatachale committee, which has given some basic guidelines on biomedical research. We talked basically on GCP. The ICH GCP had come up first, and we had the Indian GCP guidelines. And then the revisions have been happening, and then the latest, we have it in 24, while the ICH GCP, it has come in 25. So they are most of the time running parallel on the revision part.
And ma'am, there was one question about decentralization, and there was another one about compensation and reimbursement. Is, I think, what the query was about in the academic clinical trials.
Yeah, so that also they have very clearly said that in academic clinical trials, since you're doing it through, if you're talking about a PG thesis work, then it is, the institute is always better to have some corpus or some sort of funding arrangement made if there is an SAE, because it's not, the student cannot pay for, and it's not right to ask the student to pay, because now the onus is on the guide and the institute. So there should be some mechanism within the institutes to handle these sort of emergencies. And then that is for the, and then there's a difference between compensation and reimbursement. Compensation is for a study related injury or a death or something. The formulas are given by the regulators. And if you go through the NDCT rules, you have the calculation also of how to calculate. While reimbursement is if a subject is coming for a participation in the study, and then of course this also you need to have ethics committee approval for the reimbursement, because it cannot be phenomenally more. Like for the travel, for the food or something, that is a reimbursement. Or you give them a lump sum of 300 or 500 based on their ethics committee approval. So there is a subtle difference between reimbursement and compensation, and both are little, they're different entities totally. And decentralized clinical trials are mostly for the regulatory trials. We talk about decentralizing the clinical trials and for monitoring and all that. So as far as academic clinical trials, I'm not too sure whether anyone has ever done a decentralized clinical trial, but these are mostly for regulatory trials, and that again depends on the protocols. So, and I think I'm
So
very
yes, ma'am. I think we have a couple of further questions, but I think, yes, ma'am. Thank you so much for answering all the queries. But I believe one could take up all the remaining queries on email or something, some other platform. And with these words, I would like to thank you very much. And yeah, thanks everyone
And I'm
for
sure
this wonderful session.
some of their questions may be answered by subsequent speakers, because they will be going into the details of each aspect, like investigator responsibilities and sponsor and all that. So thanks a lot, Nusrat, and I thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity. Thank you very much.
Thank
Madam,
you,
you
ma'am.
can also give the answer in the chat box also if it is possible for you.
Yeah, sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, madam.
Thank
You,
you.
Nusrat madam also. Now I request Dr. Vipul Chaudhary sir to go ahead with the introduction of second speaker, that is Debashish Hota sir. Over to Vipul Chaudhary sir. Vipul, are you there?
Oh, sir, please unmute. Vipul sir, you are not audible.
Vipul, you are not
No, you are
audible.
not audible, sir.
क्या हो गया? Should I go ahead? So I will go. Meantime, I will go ahead with the introduction of Hota sir. Sir is presently working as professor and head at AIMS Bhubaneswar. Sir has worked in various capacities in PGI Chandigarh as well as LMNC New Delhi. Sir has also worked as Dean Academic at AIMS Bhubaneswar. And sir is the chairperson of Ethics Committee to Central Government Institute. Sir is also chairperson of DATB of CDSCO on Schedule H, as well as sir is subject expert committee of DCGI. And sir is having more than 100 research publication is in national as well as international journals. So I request Dr. Debashish Hota sir to go ahead with his presentation. Over to you, sir.
क्लोज हो गया क्या? शेयर करना नीचे नीचे से कहाँ है नीचे से सर वहाँ पे थर्ड नंबर थर्ड नीचे 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 हाँ क्लिक कीजिए सर इसको मैग्नीफाई कीजिए सर नीचे 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 राइट अब यहाँ पे शेयर शेयर अब शेयर कर दीजिए नीचे शेयर is it visible now, Dr. Ganesh?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So I'm making it full screen.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay, okay, it's changing.
Now it is okay, sir.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Ganesh. Thank you, organizers, for giving me the opportunity to speak about the topic. This is a very, very important topic, and this is something much needed, and our students will be definitely benefited out of this workshop. And now it is increasingly important to understand and utilize the knowledge and skills of this GCP for future studies and clinical research. So this topic of my presentation is responsibilities of investigators, sponsors, and monitors. If we combine these three, at the site, the most important person responsible for conduct of the study and generating the credible data, that is the investigator. And sponsors, obviously, they are also important because they sponsor the study, they generate the protocol, and they disseminate the IP and all those things. So they are also responsible, and monitors play in between, and they see that everything is in order, and they say that the credible data is generated without compromising the safety and privacy of the participants. So now the question is, who is a qualified investigator? Anybody can be an investigator. Fine, you want to investigate something. No, it is not exactly like that. A person responsible for the conduct of the study at the trial site and who resumes the responsibility to overall monitor, conduct, and generate the data. And he is responsible for the rights health and welfare of the study subject. This is very, very important. And also one point I like to add here, the privacy. And he is a qualified person by education, training, experience, and also his expertise are also very, very crucial. So not only he should be qualified, so qualified means he should have adequate knowledge and he should have adequate training, then he should have adequate experience, also expertise. That is also important, without which it will be very, very difficult for him to be an investigator. And investigational product, IP, that is very, very important. The product which are going to be used, it can be an active drug or a placebo or a comparator active drug. And investigator brochure, he should be familiar with the investigator brochure. That is the main document which compiles everything that is to be done and not to be done in the study. Product information like the storage, dispensing, handling of the products, and documentation of that product, everything must be properly maintained. And the information sources that are provided by the sponsor, the investigator must be familiar with him, for which a pre-study site visit and the pre-study meetings are essential before conducting the actual study. Now, as I told you that at the site, the onus lies on the investigator. What I mean, investigator is the principal investigator who is a trained person, who has experience, who has expertise, and who has knowledge of conducting a clinical research. And obviously, it is not possible for one person to conduct a study. So he has to delegate the trial-related activities to other persons, maybe a co-PI or co-investigator. Dr. Usarani few minutes back has rightly said that a co-PI is a person who will be acting as investigator in absence of the PI. So he should be equally responsible for the trial-related activities. A co-investigator is responsible for handling a part of the study, not the whole study. So co-investigator, a student can be a co-investigator. His job is to suppose collect the informed consent, filling up the documents and all those things that can be done, but he unfortunately cannot be the co-PI or PI. Then trial related training, because every trial is different, because different investigational products are used, different materials are used, different designs are used. So a proper training before the trial commences has to be done, and all members of the trial must be familiar with the system. And maintenance of the record. ICS GCP categorically has said all trial related documents must be stored and they can be archived and can be retrieved at the time of any necessity. So now there is a era of electronic data capturing and storage and retrieval. So it made the life simpler, but still the credible data must be stored and it must be reliable. Complete data set. And trial oversight. So that is the agreement that is made by the investigator with the institution. So usually it is a tripartite agreement between the investigator, then the institute and the sponsor. And this agreement also permits monitoring and auditing by the sponsor and inspection by the appropriate regulatory authorities if it happens to be a regulatory clinical trial. Then what are the major responsibilities of this investigator? Protocol. First, he should get familiar with the protocol. What are the do's and don'ts in the protocol? What are the aims, objective, methodology, and statistical methods? Everything he must be familiar. Then protocol must be submitted to the IEC. So in different institutes, different procedures are there. Like in my institute, the protocol has to go to the Dean Research. He will send the protocol to a scientific review committee. After the scientific review committee examines it, reviews it, then it goes to the ethics committee for discussion. Then amendments, anytime the protocol is amended in any aspect, then it has to be documented and press communication has to be made to the IEC and that must be also presented. Suppose if there is some amendment is made in the informed consent process, a fresh consent must be taken. The old consent may not be valid in that session because we are now changing it. A new version of consent form to be filled out. Status report, of course, some trials are very short, maybe single report is sufficient, but long-term studies where long follow-ups are needed, we have to update. The investigator has to update the progress of the study and status of the study to the ethics committee and to the sponsor. And the final closeout report, again, to be submitted to the ethics committee, to the CTRI and to the sponsor before closing out the site. So compliance, it is easier said than done. It is really a difficult job. Saying is very easy. So comply with the protocol. So whatever this GCP has said, that if you have documented something, you must follow it. And whatever is followed, you must document it. So it is vice versa. So you cannot escape. So what is documented and document what you do. Then document all protocol violations and deviation. I have 2 more slides on that. Then because violations and deviations, certain violation is not acceptable, deviation can be acceptable with permission. Then deviate only where it is necessary to eliminate immediate hazards to the trial participant. So certain deviations are permitted, but these violations are never permitted. Report on information on immediate hazard, so that can be also there. And any risk to the participant must be communicated, and many trials are stopped in between. And the famous trial, that cardiac arrhythmia suppression trial using encanide, flecainide, class 1C drugs, it was stopped because of the immediate hazard, because more death was documented with the test arm than the placebo arm. So we cannot afford to take risk on a drug. Now coming to deviation. Deviation occurs when actual divergence from the EC approved study but does not affect the patient care or safety or quality of data captured. So minor deviations are possible, like we will see subsequently what we can do. Suppose we missed some value. Suppose I recorded the blood pressure before the administration of a investigational protocol so that I can measure immediately if the study is not related to a hypertensive study. So certain things are actually height, weight. I can measure it afterwards also. It is not called as a protocol deviation. So does not render patient ineligible because some minor issues are there which is acceptable to regulators as well as the sponsors and the ethics committee. So vital signs obtained prior to informed consent, acceptable. Urine dipstick is completed but not sent to the formal urine analysis. Targeted physical examination documented instead of complete examination. Conjugated bilirubin, part of the protocol is left off lab request form, but total bilirubin was drawn and is normal. So these are certain issues and many more things that you can come across when the study is actually being conducted. Violation is divergence from the protocol, which reduces quality and completeness of the data, makes the informed consent inaccurate, or which affects the patient's safety, right, or welfare. It is not acceptable because it is a major issue. It renders the center ineligible and the disqualification of the investigator and the discontinuation of the study. Like examples, enrollment of the subject not meeting inclusion-exclusion criteria. Like we say pregnant mothers are excluded from the study, but we know that certain women participant is pregnant and yet we have included in a study. which there is a potential risk to the fetus. Unreported adverse reaction, serious in nature. Multiple site visits missed outside permissible window. Then intentional deviation the protocol in non-emergency setting. Repeated deviations of the same nature. Falsification of data. This is the worst kind of violation that we can come across. There are reports in the CDSCO that many sites which do not conduct the study but generate the data on the tabletop. That is very, very wrong, and it should be discouraged, and it must be reported also. So when to terminate a study prematurely? When the investigator institution feel that the study is not feasible. So a decision has to be taken by the PI and inform the IEC. So where if we get unexpected benefit or unexpected risk, like I told you that cardiac arrhythmia suppression trial, unexpected risk was there. So that study is not futile to go ahead. But if a study shows unusual benefit, so there is no point because we get more benefit. Benefit outweighs the risk. So we can go ahead. We cannot go ahead. We can stop the study. Then medical care, safety reporting. This is something that MD students are very fond of. That in a trial, should we provide the usual medical care? This is really a very you are conducting a study for a particular disease related issue and patient is having another comorbidity. Should you provide the treatment for comorbidity also? This is definitely an ethical dilemma. Once the patient is enrolled into a particular study, you will compare with the usual test and standard treatment. But for comorbidities, usually it is not considered. But some sites, they provide free medical care, but not the drugs. Drugs, what the patient was taking, he should continue. But the usual care is to be provided by the investigator or at the study site. And the drug related visits and everything has to be done, and compensation has to be done for trial related visits. But in case of any adverse events, maybe an adverse interaction or adverse reaction, then adequate medical care has to be provided by the participant. Here in the consent form, this is mentioned and it has to be done. Adverse events are abnormal test reports like unexpected rise in SGOT, SGPT or alkaline phosphatase or creatinine, urea creatinine ratio, or sudden rise in some other parameter like heart rate has gone up very high or blood pressure is very low. That has to be reported even in a single individual to the sponsor as well as to the ethics committee. And serious adverse event, I think that will be a separate topic, should be reported immediately, and the investigator becomes aware of the event the moment he is aware to the sponsor or IEC. That is the responsibility. So anything can happen, and more such things can happen more likely in the early phase clinical trials, but all phases are equally vulnerable. It can happen in late phase, provided the probability of happening is very, very less. So still ADRs can occur. So informed consent, now this is a very, very, it sounds easy, but not that easy. People do not understand. It has to be explained to a child of 11-year-old, standard 6 student, how you can communicate to a person, a lay person in his vernacular language, that a randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial comparing X versus standard of care in patients suffering from so and so disease. Can it be scientifically or possible to translate these terminologies? How can you translate randomized? How can you translate double-blind, placebo-controlled, or active controlled study? There are many designs of this study. to compare X versus Y in patient suffering from so and so versus so and so. So it is not easy, but try to convince, but not confuse the patient. Investigational product management, every product has a particular storage condition. Like vaccines, anti-cancer drugs, they require cold temperature. Lyophilized vaccines, they require normal refrigerated temperature, maybe 2 to 8 degrees. Others, room temperature. Some drugs require cold environment, like 10 to 24. So that is okay. That is storage. Then accountability, we follow the principle FIFO, that is fast in, fast out. Suppose in a trial, continuously products are spent and new products are coming. First exhaust the old product which has come earlier, then use the fresh lot so that you can consume and you can have a reasonable shelf life remaining. Handling, that is very, very crucial. If you are using a vaccine, then how much time you should allow to thaw, and then how long you can wait. If it is a multi-dose vaccine, after breaking the vial, if adequate number of subjects are not available, then what to be done? The principle of discarding and dispensing, that has to be also mentioned and you must follow it. Then after the trial is over, what is the again future of that product? In some studies, like as a member of the subject expert committee, I insisted that if it is life threatening where the patient life depends on that, so it is not possible for him to purchase the product after approval, and it will be very difficult for him. At least those patients who were responsible for generating a credible data, they must be provided free medical support and at least the drugs. So, but certain drugs are prohibitively expensive, like spinal muscular atrophy, a drug named Zolgensma, onasemnogene amoparvovec. It is a RNA virus vector vaccine or a drug that was very, very expensive. It comes in crores. So still, the sponsor agreed to provide free medical care to those participants who were responsible for the study. So thanks to Johnson & Johnson. Then return of the product, like placebo. What is the use of placebo? Or what is the use of any expired medicine? There should be a policy written in that protocol, so you can discard that. We are still in the principal investigators' roles and responsibility. So participant management, now you have got the ethics approval. Now the study will start. You start screening the subjects. Then you have found the eligible subjects. Then randomization and blinding. Blinding, how to explain in local language blinding? Many patients ask, should there be a Gandhari-like situation, putting a band on the eyes, or you will make us blind? That exactly the subjects are asked us, what do you mean by blinding? Will you make me blind? That is a question, real life scenario. If you conduct, then you can face such kind of questions. Then documentation, this new age clinical trials heavily dependent on documentation and the integrity of the data. So source document, yes, I am conducting a study in a hospital. The source document lies with the hospital records. I will take a photocopy of that value and I will use it in my research. The source document is always with the hospital. I take a photocopy, certify it, then I use it in my study. But sometimes the sponsors themselves have their NABL accredited laboratory and they collect the data from there. So that is also another type. But if the admitted patients we are taking, then hospital data has to be taken. But sometimes for satisfaction of the sponsor, additional data can be generated from NABL accredited laboratories. So that depends upon the study type. And records must be complete, they must be accurate, it must be legibly written and timely collected data in all aspects. So if I miss something, that means it is incomplete. Suppose the blood pressure was 120/80. If I write 180/20, so that is wrong. So that is not accurate. And it must be written legibly. As you know, some people have good handwriting, some people have bad handwriting. There is no answer to that. Now we are using more on the typewritten document that is more reliable. However, the source document is usually handwritten and we have to be very, very careful when we are using a pen and pencil. Then the data reported to the sponsor must be unambiguous, participant code that can be traced back to the identity of the participant by the investigator or institution. In case of SAE, otherwise, patient's privacy is to be kept maintained, and only who are eligible to trace the patient are to be mentioned in the protocol, whether the research team or ethics committee or the sponsor who can have access to the participant's data or identity of the participant. Now comes the next person, the big boss, sponsor. Sponsor usually an individual or company or institution or organization that takes the responsibility for, before initiation, they have to identify the areas of interest, write the protocol, then initiation of the study, management, financing, and management includes the IP, investigational product, and financing the study and complete study related activities. So it is all the responsibility of the sponsor. So it will come like sponsor, select the protocol, countries, institution, investigators, pursue regulatory authorities, because regulatory authorities also they get hundreds of protocols every day. So how to pursue them so that you have to convince that this is urgent. Like in COVID pandemic, every day 10 to 15 protocols were discussed. So I can understand how much burden they would have. But to create a space in the regulatory authority, that is again a challenge. And you must show that your product or your protocol is more important than others so that they can be convinced. And you have to appoint CROs. Then you have to take the ethics committee approval. Then publication, conference, these are next level of activities. If you are authorized to publish the data like a preliminary report, if that is approved, then you can go ahead in the conference, your any committee, you can present that. Then organize trial logistics like IP, ancillary supplies, like I want to monitor blood glucose. I cannot buy a pack of Glucon-D every time. It has to be with me and the sponsor has to provide that this is the 75-gram packet of glucose that must be taken by all subjects for postprandial sugar or glucose, this is a challenge test. Lab kits, they should be uniform because our purpose is to generate a quality data. Then negotiate contracts, budget. Actually, most of these private sponsors in India, they come to the PI, they say that we are ready to provide this many thousands per subject. But as a PI, it is very understand what do they mean. Because there are institutional, again, fees also some ethics committee charge, and there are other expenses. As a government employee, you cannot accept the funds. Only thing you can buy some consumables, disposables for the trial related activity. Again, who will provide, whether the sponsor will provide or sponsor will send the money to your account. These are very, very tricky situations. And once you are in a government setup, your hands are literally tied. So you have to make your hands clean every time. Then support the investigator, institution, site monitor, and the CRA, who will run between the investigator and the PI, co-PI, and the laboratory. Then operationalize quality, assurance control. So that is again very, very, that every patient must have the similar data. If I collect a postprandial blood sugar at 1.5 hours, 90 minutes, then every patient, if it is written in the protocol, that every subject must be using the same system, the times interval from food to postprandial collection of blood is 90 minutes. Maybe there is some window of 2 to 3 minutes or up to 5 minutes that we can allow, but not beyond that. That will make the data less credible or invalid. Then report safety issues or non-compliance or violation. These are the responsibilities of the sponsor. So lot of hectic activities. So by the sponsor, especially in a large multicentric multinational study, the responsibility varies. So they try to make everything centralized and they try to get a unified data. Then monitor. Monitoring is always overseeing. So how this trial is progressing, that it is properly conducted, the data is properly recorded, like the informed consent form and the CRF are properly filled up, the documentation part is complete, all your in and out record, finances, everything is recorded. Anything, whether it is recorded or not recorded, must be reported. What are the missing things? Then what is to be done in accordance with the protocol? What are the SOPs? SOPs must be, it is a written document, must be put on the wall so that anyone can see and anyone can follow easily. So whatever I do can be done by another individual also, the same way. And the GCP guideline, that is the main foundation which we all have to follow. Then whatever the local regulatory requirement. The monitoring basically see the protection of the data, protection of the subjects, verification of the data and compliance with the protocol. So whatever we are doing, protocol means it is a GCP affiliated protocol, so GCP compliant protocol. So we have to monitor everything. So this is what we should think about, protection of the subjects and protection of the trial also, that it should not go any wrong way. Verification of the data and compliance. Monitoring, first thing start before the study is conducted, PSB or PSSB, pre-study visit or pre-study site visit, evaluate the site, facility, feasibility and infrastructure. Then site initiation visit, site initiation will start if it is the PI, co-PI identified, they agree to resume the responsibility of the investigator, then they need training, and next comes the activation of this type. That means the protocol is really handed over, that will be evaluated by the scientific committee and ethics committee. Once you get the approval, then the study will start. Then once the protocol is approved, then IP and your funding that has to be coming, and then you can monitor. Most of the things, this coordination is made by the monitors, like ethics approval is done, IP has not reached, or IP has reached, but again, laboratory is not yet identified. So these are all to be monitored and must be checked stringently so that we should not miss out any point. And the eligibility patient. So they verify most of the things during the PSSB, but still there are always some possibility of missing out. Then closeout visit will occur once the all patients have completed their final follow-up, the number is complete, all ADRs are reported, every document is complete, then disposal of the IP and disposal of or this clearing of all the dues to all the parties, and post-trial access. This is a thing that particularly in immunosuppressant and for anti-cancer, this is a very, very big ethical issue, that those patients who provided you critical data, how can you ignore them after the study? We could not use them for their generosity. They gave their consent to be a part of the study, but now the trial is over. So we should not deny them. So they should get free medication at least for some period of time, if not lifelong. So this is a very big thing, but that must be documented and approved by the ethics committee, and by the sponsor must be agreeing to provide free post-trial access. So that's all in a nutshell, but it's a very big topic. I am thankful to the whole team of NPT, residents and colleagues of my department at AIMS Bhubaneswar. And right now I am in AIMS Rajkot for an exam duty. My special thanks to the HOD ma'am, Dr. Rima Shah and Dr. Siddharth for providing me logistics, space. I am sitting on Dr. Siddharth's chair today and the support was really overwhelming. I am really thankful to all the team. Thank you all for your kind participation and your patience. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir. Sir, am I audible?
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
sir. Go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Debashish, sir, for such an informative session. And today we have gained a deeper understanding of how the investigator, sponsor, and monitor work together to ensure the quality and compliance of clinical trial. So now it is time for question answering. Sir, there are 6 questions, but as we are running short, I will take few. First is from Dr. Karan. He wants to know that informed consent is not a single document. Kindly explain. Sir,
Yes.
Can we take one by one?
Yeah, informed consent is not a piece of paper. It is a written information and you must clarify what are the benefits of participating and benefits or harms of not participating in a study, number one. And it is a live document, not single document. It is a live document. If there is an amendment in the informed consent, again, you have to take fresh consent from the participant. Although he is already enrolled in the study, because there is a change in the informed consent process, so you have to reconsent the subject again. But you have to keep both the documents together. And
Thank
it
you,
is live throughout the study is on till the patient is enrolled.
So the second question is from Dr. Debashish, and he wants to know that what is the timeline to report about the SAE?
SAE, there are different guidelines, but first is as soon as you confirm that it is an SAE like death, so inform the ICMR guideline has very categorically said, but you must inform the ethics committee immediately, then sponsor. Then there is a timeline when to submit to the regulatory authorities, but sponsor and ethics committee must be informed immediately as soon as you have confirmed it.
And sir, one more question. Can PI be a sponsor?
In academic clinical trials, yes, you can sponsor, but where is the fund? All trials are not free. You have to spend some money. Yes, if you are rich, I don't mind being a sponsor.
So he can be.
Yes, he can be.
Okay. Ganesh sir, should we take more question or?
Yeah.
Last question. One question.
Yeah.
Okay. Sir, another one is, what if private company is willing to sponsor to conduct a trial and government institute? Any procedure to be followed?
There is no special procedure because sponsors are usually private people. Government sponsored trials are very few, like ICMR or other DST, DBT. Rarely they go for a proper clinical trial. I was part of an ICMR trial on TB vaccine, but that is very, very rare. But most of the studies what I have been involved throughout my life is sponsored by private people. So it is very, very difficult for government to provide trial support. Mostly the studies, drugs are developed by the private parties.
Okay. So thank you,
There is
sir.
no
I mean,
harm.
due to shortage of time, I mean, the rest of the questions can be communicated personally. And thanks, Debashish sir, for sharing your expertise, and to all of you for participating. And I would really like to thank Samir sir, Dikshit sir, Kamal sir, and Ganesh sir for giving me this opportunity. Thank you all.
Thank
So
you very
now
much.
we are marching towards the end of the today's session. I am very thankful to all office bearers of NPT for allowing us to conduct this workshop, as well as our both the speakers, especially Dr. Usharani, as well as Debashish Hota sir, for their excellent presentation, and as well as moderator Dr. Shafiq madam and Dr. Chaudhary sir for their time-specific moderation. Lastly, my sincere thanks to all participants for their active participation and patience hearing. So with this, now I declare that today's session is over, and we will again meet on 30th of March at 3 p.m. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Namaskar.
Thank you, sir. Namaste.
Thank you, madam. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Vipul. Thank you, Kamal, sir.
Thank you, Kamal, sir.
Thank you.